English paper piecing. What is it? How does it work? Let's take a deep dive into English paper piecing. In this video, I'm going to give you a little history about the craft of English paper piecing, and I'm also going to show you 3 ways to make one of the most basic shapes they use in English paper piecing, the hexie. English paper piecing is a quilting technique that originated in England. It started in the 1770s, but it didn't become popular until the 1800s. Here's what the technique involves. You're cutting out a template, you're sewing fabric around that template, you're connecting all of those templates of fabric together, then you're removing the paper at the end and leaving yourself with a finished design. There's a couple things I love about English paper piecing. I sew a lot and I have a ton of scraps just like laying around. And what's great about English paper piecing is this is a wonderful way to use those up because you're going to be using smaller squares to create your pieces. So for like a 1.5 inch hexagon, like I'll show you in this video, for this size of a hexagon, you're going to use about a 3.25 to 3.5 inch square, or well, we'll get into all the different shapes you can use, but that's as much as you need. So depending on what you want to make with it, you could use up all of your scraps. That's what this was. This is a combination of years of different outfits. Like this was a dress for my daughter when she was 2. This was a bag that I made. Like it's got history in it too, which makes it really special. Here's the other thing I love about English paper piecing. I can't always be in my sewing room. I have 3 kids, I have a family to take care of, and at night I like to keep my hands busy. So for me to be able to sit down with my family while watching a show or something together and be able to be piecing together my quilt feeds my soul. And so that's something to remember, is you don't always have to use a machine to sew something. That's another advantage of English paper piecing. I have seen so many comments on here that you guys just don't have a sewing machine yet and you're saving up for one, or you're waiting to find the right one for you. This is a wonderful introduction into hand sewing. And to be honest, learning how to hand sew first is really helpful when you're learning how to just sew in general. I can't recommend hand sewing enough. And this is a wonderful way to get into it. The other nice thing about it is you can make it as big or as small as you want. Maybe you make one of these hexie flowers and it turns in like what it did to me, and you get obsessed with it and you just keep making them, and that's when this whole quilt became. So I just had a stack of hexie flowers that I eventually started sewing into lines and then creating into a quilt. You can also use these as appliques. So I made a bag a few months ago out of an old pair of jeans, and I needed to cover up some spots on those jeans, and I used some leftover hexie flowers and zigzag stitched them on. And this includes all different shapes, not just hexies. You can do parallelograms, you can do triangles, you can do squares. There's a lot of different aspects that go into each one of these methods, and there is no wrong method. It's just which one works best for you. So let's get into that, and I'll show you how to make your very own hexies.
For my hexies, I like to use Sharps number 7 needles. They're just a good size for my hand. You use whatever you like. I'm using 100% cotton Gutermann thread, but again, you use whatever thread you enjoy using. The first method is the sewing method using a template. So I'm going to take my template and lay it on my square of fabric. I'm going to pin it through the middle, right through the cardboard, because I want it to stay in place for what I'm about to do. Fold one of your edges down and then fold the matching corner down, and take your thread and needle. I have it just single threaded with a little knot. Point your needle down through the layers and go through both of those layers of fabric, and you're going to pull it tight. Turn your hexagon and then fold the next corner down over what you just sewed. Sew down through those layers of fabric with your needle and pull those threads tight again. Then keep working your way around the hexagon using this exact same method. By hand sewing around your hexagon this way, you're creating sort of a temporary basting stitch that is going to hold your hexagon fabric in place while you're working on your quilt. And you'll leave your papers in for the duration of your quilt just because you need it to hold its form. It won't really hold its form if you take the papers out at this point. An advantage to this method is that you're using the template so it gives it nice shape, but the papers pop out super easy when you're ready to remove them. So that's an advantage. Now, the disadvantage of it is it's a little bit more time consuming, but as you get better at it, it takes you less and less time to sew a hexie. The next method I'm going to cover is how to sew a hexie using no paper template whatsoever. You're actually going to sew it out of a circle shape. I use my protractor to make a 5-inch circle for this 1.5-inch hexagon. Fold your fabric in half and then in half again, and you're going to crease those marks. This is creating your guidelines for how you're going to sew this. So up through the back and back down. This stitch is important because it's creating like a home base for you to come back to. So once you have that in there, I want you to go to the top of your first line, and you're going to grab just like 1/8 inch of the fabric, as little as possible without the stitch slipping out from the fabric fraying. So 1/8 of an inch is a pretty good measurement. Fold the fabric down to the center and pull that thread taut, and then just press it with your fingers or with your pressing stick. And then move up to the top of that line, and you're going to see how I'm pulling that fabric down using my 1/8 inch just right from the edge. And when I do this method, it makes me think of those crunch wrap things you get from Taco Bell, because they kind of look like this. Sew around your crunch wrap fabric hexie by continuing to just fold each little piece down and grabbing the top right corner with 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And as you do this, you'll see that it's starting to form the hexie. Now, pros of this method, you're not using any paper. So if you're anti like waste and using unnecessary paper, this is a great option for you because all you need is the template. I would say a con of this method is it's a little bit harder to get your measurements accurate because you're grabbing like 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and sometimes one edge might be a little bit off. But as with anything, practice makes perfect. So just keep practicing this method if you're passionate about learning it, and you'll eventually get it. And then once you get to the end, you just tie it a little knot in the center, flip her over, and you've got a beautiful hexie that you made not using any paper at all. Now, each size circle makes a different sized hexagon. So I made a little chart for you. Feel free to screenshot this so that you can know which size circle makes which size hexie, because that's helpful. The last method I'm going to show you is the glue stick method. And for this, you just need a glue stick and your template. You're going to lay your paper template on your piece of fabric, and you'll just put a little bit of glue around the edges of your hexagon. And this one I like because it's fast, and I don't like to take forever to make my hexagons. I want to get right to my sewing. So if you like to move quickly, this is a good option for you. You're just going to fold those edges in and stick them down. Now, if you want to cut the hexagon shape out of your fabric with like 3/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch sticking out on each edge so you don't have excess fabric, you can do that as well. I just use the square because I'm lazy. So the disadvantage of this is that it's a little harder to remove those hexagons out of your quilt when they're done. The advantage of it is that it's a time saver for sure. Once you decide on your preferred method and you make your hexagon templates, let me show you how to sew them together. I'm going to load my regular Sharps number 7 with a single thread, and I'm going to knot it at the bottom. Take your 2 hexies that you want to attach, and you're going to put them pretty sides together and match up 2 of your edges. And if you want to clip this is perfectly fine. Once you get started with it, sometimes you don't even need the clips anymore, but don't feel bad about using them. That's helping you with your accuracy. When you go through your fabrics, you are going to sew a tiny piece of that fabric from each hexagon. You're grabbing maybe 2 to 3 threads from the hexagon. So this takes a little bit of practice. And you're going to be doing a whip stitch. And a whip stitch is when you go in from the right, out from the left, and then loop that fabric around and go back in through the right and out through the left. It's basically creating a spiral down the seam of your hexagons. This is a really great stitch because it's not super visible on your front of your project, but it does hold your pieces together very well. And when people say that hand sewing is therapeutic, this is the part right here that I think makes me feel good in my soul. It's that repetitive, just back and forth motion of the needle in my hand that makes me feel really in control of my life, at least for a few minutes. Does anyone else feel this way? Just me. When you finish sewing down that line of stitches, this is what you'll have. And this is when I start to feel really successful about what I'm doing because it just looks really pretty. Now you can see how easily this paper's popping out with that basting stitch method, and it really does hold its shape. It folds right back in. Now another quick tip I'm going to show you is these templates, you can actually make them at home. So this hexagon cutter is something you can pick up on Amazon. I've got them loaded in my English paper piecing part of my Amazon store. And this is a wonderful way to use up your junk mail because let's be honest, some of that junk mail comes on really, really nice cardstock. So whenever I get a piece of junk mail, I actually throw it in a pile. And when I'm working on a hexie quilt, I have tons of automatic paper templates. So you're reducing waste and you're making them yourself. So if you want to use one of these cutters, that's a perfectly good option. It's also a fun way to get your kids involved because they love punching paper for some reason, at least mine do. That might help get them interested in sewing.
I hope this video was helpful in showing you how to make different types of hexes using different methods and give you a little bit more of an understanding of what English paper piecing is. It is such a fun hobby. I'm going to post a few more videos on this as we start to grow and build a project together. And I have a quilt pattern that I'm working on right now that I'm hoping to introduce very soon that will be a very simple, beginner-friendly quilt that you can make on your own using the basic hexagon flower. Make sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up to date with all of my sewing shenanigans. Thanks for following along, and I'll see you next time.